Mike. How's it going, bud?
I'm good, Steve. How are you doing this morning?
Not too bad. So I understand we've got some questions about like buyer agency and pocket listings and all kinds of stuff we're going to talk about. We put a package together, and I think everybody's trying to get some clarity on that.
I think that's going to be really helpful. There is so much going on in the marketplace right now, and I think that us being able to give any information out there for our agents is going to make them more successful, especially as they're planning their year. Um, I've got a lot of things that I was hoping we could talk about, Steve. In particular, the first thing that I think we want to address, though, is let's talk about buyers agency agreements. I think that that's something that our agents are going to need to talk about, but they also may be lacking some confidence to talk about that. When do you think we should be having those conversations?
Yeah, good point. So first of all, I know that in some states buyer agency is required, some states it's not. So don't let that get confused depending on who's listening to the recording. But truth of the matter is when you're first meeting someone and you're actually having engaging conversations about buying real estate, you probably should be having the buyer agency conversation. And that should be through a buyer presentation, right? So we should be telling them, hey, you know what, this is what I'm going to do for you. This is what the process is going to look like. We're going to get a pre-approval. We're going to write an offer. There might be negotiations. They may ask for closing costs that we may not. So whatever all that process is in your buyer presentation that you can use from your Moxie, right? Your Moxie Present stuff, they have some stuff in there you can do it. And you should be talking about that buyer representative, and you should be getting them to sign a buyer agency at that point, because they may decide to go out and look at something that's a new construction or for sale by owner, and they need to know what the process is. And you also are protecting yourself for compensation on that if you're going to be working with them, helping through it. So
I think that's a really good point to bring up too, Steve. That gives us an opportunity before we're talking about this house that we're going to move forward on. We're able to say, okay, and at some point we may need to have a conversation about my compensation because this is how I get paid. And there's a chance that you may be responsible for that, Mr. Homebuyer. So I think I think you're right. A consultation for buyers is something that a lot of agents have been lax on that is probably going to be a lot more important going forward, don't you think?
absolutely. I mean, with the court cases out there, obviously, and some things going with compensation and maybe what other agencies are deciding to offer or not offer is going to make a difference, right? And it may make a difference in how you represent them. So if it's, I use the example of having a conversation with them. If you decide you're going to go to a builder, this is what you say and what you do, right? And this is how that works. They might tell you about closing costs that the builder will give you or not give you based on whether you're represented by an agent. That may not be the right way to do it from the builder, but some builders do that. And having those conversations up front about being pre-qualified, knowing what you can afford, when can you move, what's the process look like, just like you would for a listing, right? It's a listing appointment for a buyer. And during that process, just like you get at the end of the listing appointment, after you do your listing presentation, you're going to get the listing agreement signed. Well, this situation, you're going to get the buyer agreement signed. Waiting until you have a property and a contract to try to do the buyer agency agreement is probably not the best way to do it. Or doing it verbally like they allow in some states is probably not the best way to do it.
Yeah, I can see that. I think that a lot of the past couple of years, people have developed maybe a bad habit of approaching things that way, that you go meet some people, they see this house, they love this house, let's write on this house. And it's kind of pushed this to the back burner. I think it's something that the agents need to put a focus back on, is having a buyer's consultation similar to a listing consultation that talks about here's what the steps forward look like, and here's some of the things that we're going to encounter down the road.
And don't forget, it's how you show your value, right? Like, what are you going to do for them for your fee? Just like a listing agreement. So like, what are you going to do? Part of that may be negotiation. It may be finding properties they may not necessarily see just on the web. So as that falls maybe into our pocket listing things or something we talk about. So,
well, and that actually leads us into the next thing. What is a pocket listing? And does that go by any other names that people maybe would have heard in their marketplace?
yeah, there's probably all kinds of names. So let's remember we have agreements and then we have potentials, right? So agreements are open listings. So, just to keep this real honest and what's there, open listing is anybody can put a sign in the yard. You have an agreement to sell it. If you sell it, you will get paid. If another agent sells it, they'll get paid. Open listing. So it's open to the market. We have an exclusive listing, right? Which is basically, Mr. Seller, if you sell it, you don't have to pay me a commission. But if I sell it or any other realtor sells it, I get a commission. And then you have exclusive right to sell, which is that no matter who looks at this property and whether it sells during this period of time, I will typically get a commission. And then you have pocket listings. And I'll use that term vaguely because there are different terms for it. But, I know that an investor bought this house a certain day and they're going to renovate it and then sell it at a certain time in the future. It may not be listed yet. but I could consider that a pocket listing because I know this person is going to sell it at some time in the future and at some general pricing. So if I have a client that wants that, I may not have a listing agreement for that property, right? But I have a buyer agency with you, that may be a pocket listing. Or it could be some situation of an estate where you know this property is coming, or somebody that you know that if they could do these things to make it sell, they would sell a property. There's nothing wrong with those, right? They're absolutely out there, and there's things that you should be doing to protect your buyers' clients, right? If you actually are doing what you're supposed to, if that's a property that meets their needs, regardless if it's in MLS or not, you should be helping them try to, acquire that property.
I think that was a good explanation, Steve, especially because there's been so much of a focus from what a pocket listing means as far as the MLS is concerned, and that's this much of the pie. There's still a whole lot more to it. So that was helpful. I appreciate that. Are there pros and cons for pocket listings that if that's a conversation we're having with our clients that we could maybe clear that up for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously the pros are, you have access to availability of properties that are not in MLS, right? That's a huge pro. If I'm working with a buyer, I can give you opportunities because of my relationships that you couldn't get somewhere else. Cons can be as compensation. Cons can be is that the seller may have situations that they want to make it a pocket listing. It's not always, I just haven't put it on the market yet. It may be, things like domestic violence, right? Or they may have situations where the address they don't want out there for some reason, that they are willing to sell the property, but they're not willing to put a sign in the yard and tell everybody that they're doing it. It may be affluent people, right? It may be somebody that I want to sell the house, but frankly, I don't want everybody coming through my home. So yes, it's available for sale, but I'm not going to put it out there to the market and let everybody know what I'm doing. And there's 1,000 other examples on that, but there's just a couple, right? It may be an estate. They may know that my heir has passed away and they know that they're going to sell it, but they may not want, there are other heirs involved in what's going on because there may be conflict in the estate. That doesn't mean just because it's an estate and they're going to sell it, it doesn't mean you have to go through the MLS to do it. You'll see them use other methods like auction or other things where they can get to circumvent that process. So pocket listings are valuable, and it's something that you should make sure you're having conversations about if you know people buying or selling. So.
Something you said earlier that actually struck with me is the opportunity of knowing that something is coming down the pipe that may be 6 months out. So that's, internally, we've got some tools like exclusive look and sneak peek and things like that that can be really helpful for that. But I think a lot of people discount the value of hearing from somebody, hey, sometime this year we're looking to sell, but we're not totally sure yet. Well, that's something that may have a little bit less competition, that maybe you could help those people achieve their goal and have a lot less stress about it, as well as helping somebody else. So there can be a lot of positive things to it.
You might sell a builder a lot knowing they're going to build a house.
Sure.
And you kind of know what they're going to build, but they're 10% into the process.
So that makes perfect sense. That could very well be a helpful tool going forward. I think there could be a lot more variations of using that, I think. Just because of the way that the market is, and I was kind of hoping you could give us a little bit of a viewpoint of what you think about the market, especially as we're going into the start of a new year that has a lot of big things that are supposed to happen in it, elections and things like that. Give me an idea of what you're thinking about the market right now for 2024.
Yeah, so 2024 is an election year. That's always an interesting conversation. Typically right before the election, call it 6 weeks, 8 weeks, right before the actual, this November or whatever happens, people hit the brakes and they're on hurry up and wait. And they just say, I'm going to wait to see what happens before I make a decision to move forward with my housing. And that's a pretty typical presidential election cycle scenario. I do think the rest of the year, I think we're going to see a big crescendo. I think we're still going to have inventory problems. I think you've got some pent-up demand of people that maybe went into rentals last year. Their rental times are going to be coming up. They're going to be looking back at the market going, look, I paid this much for rent. The rent was relatively high. What could I afford to buy? I'll only rent it because I couldn't find something. So those will probably come back into the market. So I think it'll be a good, healthy market. I think what's probably not on every agent's radar that really should be is this is still and it is in all markets. I shouldn't just say this market, but this is a listing centric scenario. You need to be out soliciting for listings. If you have the listings, you will win. If you don't have the listings, you'll be at everybody else's beck and call to hope you make money.
I agree with that. You make the example all the time of it's like having a store with nothing to sell. You have a shoe store with no shoes in it. If you have listings, at least you have something to sell for the people that are looking to buy, no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, it's an example of like, I can't hang a sign around a buyer's neck and have them walk around going, I need listings, right? That's really hard to do, but I can put a sign in the yard and it creates all these buyers for me of future business by just having a listing. So that one piece of work that I did multiplies much easier on a seller, on a listing than it does on a buyer.
Well, and at the same time, if we're taking the time to go around and work the neighborhood around each listing, we may find people that are watching what they're going to do because they plan on selling something in the next 4 months, 6 months, something like that. And they're just, okay, well, that was in our plans too. Let's watch what happens. And you can get the opportunity to help them if you're working the neighborhood around that listing.
Absolutely. People get into the focus of, I've got to work listings, and they do. Listings are the name of the game. But if I have a house, if I have a listing currently, and the listing is at $400,000, there's likely a move up buyer. That's probably not a first time buyer. So soliciting buyers for that house probably means they have something to sell. So I'm getting 2 for 1 out of that. So think through that, right?
Yeah, that's a really good example as well. And with what we were just talking about with pocket listings, do you feel like this market is going to be conducive to pocket listings, meaning that there's going to be more of them, or that's a strategy that some people may want to employ?
I think that as the industry is changing, good, better, and different is happening. We're going to have some of that stuff where agents will become restrictive in what they're willing to put to the market, what their knowledge is. And I think you're also going to have clients, be it our buyers and sellers, that may be restrictive to put their stuff out there because, hey, look, I've got this interest rate. I don't know if I want to sell. I think the market's going to be a good market. I think the pocket listing stuff, I think you'll see more of those. Interest rates will come down. The pocket listings are there because we have pent up demand. People are willing to sell if they have a low interest rate, but I won't sell unless I can find something else, or I won't sell unless this happens. So that's a pocket listing technically, right? That's somebody that I will pay you a commission to sell my house if these triggers happen. So that's what we have.
Right on. And as far as the pocket listings go, Steve, what do we need to worry about when it comes to ethics or anything like that to be able to make sure that we're moving forward in the correct way, and that our agents are doing the things that they need to do to be clear with the client and set expectations, as well as be prepared for what happens after the listing does go, or it not goes to the market because it's a pocket listing. We start talking about the pocket listing.
Yeah.
Does
So
that make sense?
no, I mean, certainly we have NAR's code of ethics, right? I mean, that everybody needs to follow. But let's face it, we're all Coldwell Banker. We hold ourselves to a much higher standard than the general industry does. It's to do the right thing, right? And make sure that you're being fair and frank to everyone. It's really that simple. And if there's a question, typically I keep saying if you have to ask, you probably need to reconsider where you're at, right? If am I doing the right thing question, then you need to check yourself, right? Because that's what you need to be figuring. It's do the right thing. If you do the right thing, all the rest of it finds through. Again, we all wear blue. We hold ourselves to a considerably higher standard than the rest of the industry.
I agree with you. And the right thing to do is always the right thing to do. There really shouldn't be much question about it. And like you said, if you're starting to have doubts, you're probably trailing down a way you don't want to go.
So my measurement is really simple. And when somebody brings me a problem, and I get a lot of wild ones that come to my desk, is if you took the money out of the equation, what would you do?
Yeah.
And that pretty much is always the right answer.
That makes sense. It really does. And yeah, I think that's a really good guide for that. If you take the money out of the equation, what would you do? Because that takes what people think is the biggest motive out of it. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. I really do. As far as communication with clients, what kind of communication should we do if we're dealing with a pocket listing? I understand there's times that there may be an agreement, but there's also times, the example that you just made, where somebody may want to sell 6 months from now, that there probably is no agreement. So is there communication that you would have with that person about interest or anything like that?
Sure. Yeah. So you might have an agreement. I'll use the investor example. So I may have signed an agreement to sell this house in the future when it is done, and we think it's 90 days from now. So I went ahead and got my listing agreement pre-done, knowing that in 90 days, I'm going to put it in MLS and put it on the market. But in the meantime, I might find a client, right? So there's already kind of terms built into that equation, right? We've agreed, me and the client have agreed what we're willing to pay, what the compensation, what the roles are. If it is hey, I know a guy, then you need to make sure you're good and clean about setting those boundaries. This is what I'm willing to do. I have a buyer agency agreement with this person, or I don't, whatever that is. This is what my compensation is going to be, and this is the role I'm going to play for that. And that's that listing agreement or buyer agency agreement, and how that plays. And it's either I represent you, or you're signing a non-representation agreement. Like, you realize that I'm going to be working for the best interests of party A or party B.
Right on. I'm with you. I keep hearing a consistent theme here that setting expectations is absolutely critical, and that shouldn't be new, but especially in something like this that may have a little bit softer boundaries than we're used to playing in, setting expectations and making sure that you're playing inside those boundaries is really important.
Yep.
Yeah. And again, the need for consultations and things like that is over and over important, so that we can do that out front instead of in a reactive position, which is where we don't want to be.
Absolutely.
So when it comes to strategies for selling something that may be a pocket listing, what are the marketing strategies and things like that look like? We talked about already how we have exclusive look and sneak peek within our company, but are there other things that you think would be effective ways to spread the news about a pocket listing?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it depends from a marketing point of view what you're going to do. So I can use a commercial as an example or whatever. I may be selling let's say you want to sell your mobile home park. It's a unique product. Not everybody buys it. It has some parameters in it, which I know to be able to measure. It has to make this much money. There's this many trailers. So if that is a listing that I know somebody is going to sell, I can simply just put a needs and wants out and say, I have something that meets these metrics. If you have a client, I may have a possible seller for you. So that's one way, right? It's a buyer's need scenario. If it is I know I'm going to be marketing this property in the MLS in 90 days because they're renovating it, same thing. Here's pictures of it when they bought it. Here's what they're planning to do to it, or new construction, same thing. This is what I predict. This is what I predict the outcome to be from this, and the pricing for it. So you can tell the story of where it's going from and where it's going to. And you can market those internally, obviously, to your own databases and our own agents' databases. Different MLSs that we're in, some of them will allow some versions of this now, some of them will not. So make sure you look at your MLS and make sure you're staying within the rules. It's different than coming soon. Some of the coming soons even got a little wonky between some of our MLSs, so make sure you know those rules. But internally, that's what we're here to do, is to list and sell property. So we should have conversations with our peers about what's going on. We don't do a great job at helping. I hear agents talk a little bit about, I got this listing, I needed to give it the most exposure possible by getting it on MLS and getting it to everyone, right? That I hear that statement over and over. How would that statement look if I've got this buyer and I need to get the most exposure to them necessary so they get the best property they want? Are we doing that? And we may not be, right? Because we're waiting for something to hit the MLS. And is that probably best for your client? Maybe not.
So internally, we've got tools such as our Facebook group. We have the exclusive look and the sneak peek. Of course, we know how to be able to email each other and things like that. Is there anything else that is a helpful tool that I'm not thinking of internally that we could share listings between ourselves?
I think it's gentleman discussions, right? Like, literally, it's, when you're having conversations, if somebody's holding an open house, say, well, hey, look, I have one coming down the pipe that is similar to this. Make sure, I know you're doing this open house at the same price point or same area or whatever. It's really collaboration. But exclusive look is a great one. They need to make sure they're using that tool. We're not doing it enough. REO properties. A lot of times on these foreclosure properties, we know they're coming for months before they're ever here. We know we're getting them. You can call it a pocket listing if you want. But ultimately it's a listing. You just can't make an offer until this date. So that's stuff on exclusive look and communication we should be doing. And we as a company don't do a great job at that. It's pretty amazing. I think we're right around 1,000 listings right now we're carrying. Okay, that's a lot of property. We probably have that many or more buyers out there, to be really honest. Are we matching those? Or are we just waiting for the MLS to do the work for you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think a lot of people, again, have gotten into the bad habit of setting people up on the drip from the MLS or from their website, and it's going to the client, but they're not seeing what's out there themselves that may be a good match, that maybe they are familiar with the property in a lens that's not on the MLS. So it's one of those go to work things. It really is.
No, I mean, that's kind of what you get paid to do, right? They don't give you big checks to sit around and wait for somebody to click a button.
Yeah, that's the truth. Do you have any examples, Steve, from your varied years of experience that where this has been a very, very good and helpful tool for a client? And it's okay if you can't think of one, but I didn't know if you had an instance that this was the right tool for the job or the right way to go about it to accomplish the client's goals.
And tool you mean is what?
Using a pocket listing, not necessarily taking it out to the open market in the way that we traditionally do, and things like that.
So I'm gonna tell the story at a buyer's view, and then I'm gonna translate it to a listing. So one of the techniques I teach is, hey, you wanna sell, you've got a buyer that wants a property, there's nothing available for them in MLS that matches their needs, whatever it is. So the concept is you prospect to a neighborhood that meets their needs, and you say, hey, look, I'm working with a client. Their name is Joe and Bill. They got 2 little kids. They want to be in this school district, and the kid goes to that school because they play soccer or whatever. And I made a promise to them that I would make sure that they didn't miss out on something that might be coming on the market or somebody wanted to sell. So I'm calling each one of the people in the market, or I'm having a conversation with each one of the people in the market to make sure I do what I said I was going to do for my clients. So that is from a buyer perspective to do that, right? You can take that same exact example and translate it to a listing. So, hey, Mr. Agent, or hey, Mr. Clients, here's a profile of what I'm getting. I have this coming. I know that listings are hard to come by, like this property, and I know that you guys have been wanting one. If there's somebody that you know that might be interested in a property like this, please let me know. This is something I have available or have access to find. And it's really that basic. Telling a story, giving them a reason, creating a conversation.
And we have a lot of tools that can help us accomplish that, with being able to do a quick e-blast to all the agents that we have in our database, with being able to send it to our own agents, with being able to send something to our own buyer clients and things like that. We have a number of tools through Moxie Impress that we can do that with to make it really, really easy.
Yeah, you should be sending this out to your database and say, this may not be for you, but if you know of someone, this is something I've told the seller, I'm going to do my best to find the best client for this property in this timeline, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Here's a profile.
Yeah.
And get your buyers to help you. It's funny, when you use the technique that I used, people may always tell you, I don't want to sell my house, but they're always impressed that you're willing to go the extra mile to help these people find a home for themselves. And when you place it in that situation, they're more likely to help the people that you're trying to help than they are to help you to list it because you're a salesperson. But if I can help the family find a home, I feel good about myself. So I'm willing to do that. Same situation. If I have a seller that has a domestic dispute situation where they don't want to put the property on the market and put a sign in the yard, look, I have this lady. She's in a situation where she can't publicly put the house out for market, but I promised her I would do everything I could to get her the best price and the best terms for her. Do you know anybody that might want a 3-bedroom house, right, around this price point in this area? I don't know if you're the one for it or if you know someone, but anything you can do to help this lady would be great.
Yeah.
Doesn't that sound super simple to use? And it makes people feel good, right? And you're doing a great service for both parties.
And you're doing a really good job at bringing the client's ultimate goal down to part of your process, which is ultimately part of our job too, is accomplishing the client's goal. They may want to sell their big, beautiful house for $5 to the right person. You got to find the right person. That's your job. That accomplishes their goal.
Yeah, it's not always money. My agents get into this. They have to sell the house for the most money. That sometimes is not exactly the goal, right? Sometimes it's a time problem. Sometimes it's a solution issue. When I say that, it may be, I have an estate. My solution is I need to dissolve the estate so I get rid of all the headaches that I'm having with it. So money might not be my solution. It may be the goal to get the estate settled, or it may be the goal to pay off this particular person because they need money for healthcare for something in the estate. So it's not. Don't get hung up on money as the only negotiating piece.
I believe that. I agree with you on that. And again, it just comes down again to setting expectations, have the conversation, and make sure you're working with your client to accomplish their goals, whatever that looks like. And that's just a theme that I try to play through my head, and I hope everybody else does too.